Alrighty, we're here with Brandy and Wayne. We're technically still in East Palestine, but we're kind of right between East Palestine and Negley. Negley is just downstream of East Palestine. Essentially, you may have heard the name at this point. Brandy lives right here along. This is Leslie Run, correct? Yep. And Brandy was one of the first people to actually start posting photos of dead fish popping up in the stream. I guess. Do you want to talk about, give us a little bit of a timeline right when this happened and what you started seeing?
So the train derailed on Friday, February 3rd, and then February 5th, which was Sunday, we started noticing dead fish in the stream. So I, took pictures and posted to Facebook because other people needed to know that. There's a lot of people in this area that have livestock that use the creek water to, water horses or cows, whatever. So, it was very important that everyone became aware not to use the water.
Absolutely. And so based on that time, too, that's even before they did the whole controlled burn. Yes, that didn't look super controlled to me, but the burn.
Wasn't controlled. It was not controlled.
Yeah, it was.
I was explained today that the controlled burn is where you're getting no carbons that create that black smoke. That's a controlled burn. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a controlled burn there. Right. They had a burn to open the tracks back up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And it seems like, too, so before the controlled burn even, you're already seeing the fish.
The day before.
The day before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess after the burn, was that a theme that continued? Did things get worse or?
I really wasn't out here a whole lot to really look at the creek. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we continued to see dead fish. Just a couple of days ago, there was a whole pile of them, like a school almost. I think with some of the rain yesterday, I know we didn't get a lot of rain, but I think some of that kind of washed downstream. So.
Yeah. And, you mentioned livestock and farmers and whatnot. We actually just talked to someone who is, chemist essentially, and he was kind of talking to us about dioxins, which is essentially after this vinyl chloride burns off, putting it very simply, because I'm not a chemist, unless one of you are a chemist, sorry, I don't know. Putting it simply, eventually it breaks down into these dioxins. Dioxins getting into water, it's not something that can just dissolve into water and necessarily go away. He was just telling us, if we've got, livestock drinking this stuff, it gets into their systems, your body doesn't really digest it, it works its way into you, and it becomes something that can genetically, mess with these animals, even with their offspring down the line, causing issues. You can start to put two and two together that becomes very scary. And even though, this stream isn't necessarily your drinking water, although that's a whole nother problem with wells and whatnot, this could really affect agriculture. Do either of you know, folks who are farmers or anything like that personally and can share?
Neighbor, yeah. The neighbor has 12 acres on top and approximately 12 acres right here that he puts in soybean and then corn the next year. So that will need tested. But I don't know that the plume came here. I think the uncontrolled burn mainly went toward Chippewa and then switched and went north toward the turnpike. But it was this way far enough to where there's people in East Palestine, they're losing their foxes, their tame foxes.
Chickens.
Chickens are dying. Ponds, Butch Foster owns a farm approximately 3 miles from the burn site, and he lost all of his fish in his pond. They're all dead. So the fallout on that was pretty powerful. I think that's what's concerning most of the people that aren't right there at the site is this plume. How much damage did this plume cause? And there's nothing you can do about that. You've already had that terrible burn, and now we're stuck with it. How long will it take for the rain to put that chemical deep enough, if it is there? And we've seen nobody down here testing to see if that ground's worthy of planting. I wouldn't plant anything right there at the tracks.
Unfortunately, we spoke with the resident yesterday. We saw him. We went to the Roadhouse for lunch today. We saw him in there again, and he was concerned. He lives near the tracks. He always has a nice garden in his backyard. And he jokingly said to me, he's like, "You gonna eat my tomatoes if I grow them this year, or eat any of my other stuff?" And I was like, and he's joking with me because he knows he's worried about it himself. And you're taking that away from folks doing it recreationally, but economically, this area is reliant on
A lot of people in this area do garden. You know, our neighbor across the road, she's in her late 80s and she puts a garden in every year. She's got grapevines. You know, we have wild berry bushes that, you know, we pick every summer. Am I going to be able to do that this year? Are they going to be safe to eat? You know, that's a big concern.
Yeah, we have an Airbnb up in East Palestine, and we're on the good side of the town from the wind. We've already had everyone that was scheduled canceled. And probably until this all clears up, or maybe they just don't want to come to East Palestine now. I mean, the media has put a pretty grim picture on this, and rightly so.
And I don't know if you can hear, there's an Amish buggy like right there on the road. Yep. So that brings an concern to the, you know, hunting. A lot of people in this area are hunters. You know, are you going to be able to eat the deer meat, the rabbit meat this fall?
Right.
You know.
And unfortunately, again, it's been, you know, we're approaching 3 weeks since this happened. Up until 2 days ago, all of the tests that were being done on the water and the air were being done by contractors hired by Norfolk Southern and/or contractors hired initially by the EPA. We looked into both of these contractors, though. It's two companies, CTEH, which you might have seen some of their trucks driving around town, and then the other is Tetra Tech. Both of these companies have a history. One of them was dealing with the Deepwater Horizon incident, which was that big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The other was dealing with testing on like a military base. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, that had a big issue similar. And in those cases, these companies were found to be having issues with falsifying test information, with mishandling of data. And these are the folks that, you know, the government is expecting you all to just believe these testing. I mean, if you want people to believe it, maybe start by using reputable companies and not trying to hide this sort of stuff.
It took 3 weeks for some truths to come out. You're testing with people that work and are employed by the person that caused this accident. So you're kind of shaded on what you're going to get. And so we really haven't heard all the chemicals that made it to the creek, all the chemicals that are in the people's yards and on their houses. My daughter, who's very proficient, she has a whole list of all the manifests of the railroad, and she knows everything that was on that train. And then when you listen to the interviews on the television about some of these government officials, they're saying that there was only 3 tankers that were flammable on that train. Well, then why was there more than 20 burning?
Right.
And so when you're shooting that stuff out and people have to listen to that, you develop a mistrust. I don't even want to hear it anymore, because they're not reputable.
Agreed. And unfortunately,
I'm going to add one more thing. Yeah. The Christian on the interview today with the CEO of Northern Pacific, he said, "What are you going to do for me to make this right?" And he says, "We're going to do whatever it takes to make this right." Well, a person just like yourself asked, "Are you going to purchase this home? That seems like that would be the right thing to do." And he skated it. He just skated it. He just says, "We're going to do the right thing by all of you." The right thing is that if a piece of property can't be back to where it was at, you own it. You caused it. You own it. And they're not doing that. They're not making that commitment. They're giving everybody $1,000 to see if they can hush them up a little bit, but there's some people that are devastated by this, and they're not going to be hushed up. And if a lawyer doesn't get a hold of this, get them right by the balls and make them do what they're supposed to do, then it ain't going to happen. This creek, when it floods the first time, is going to be in the Ohio River. They can't clean that chemical out of that creek. For 4 miles of creek, that's going to the Ohio after the first flood.
Absolutely. And the property values thing, I mean, we've been talking to people for basically a week at this point. The impossible situation that we're seeing so many people be put into, you know, we're talking to single moms, single dads who all they've got is their house, basically. They're kind of they skate by, they make it work. But now you're telling them, you know, they've got kids who are sick. Their choice is either leave without being able to sell their house. They got to try to go somewhere. They got nowhere to go. They got no money when they get there. Their job is here. Or the alternative is to stay and see what happens, and hopefully, you know, years down the line, not find out that whatever these chemicals are causing to, you know, people medically, you know, that's an impossible decision for folks to make. And to your point, we watched some of that last night, some of that town hall, and they actually did a good job. And those residents, I mean, really stuck it to the CEO. The CEO didn't answer a damn thing, really,
No,
though.
he did not. He did not commit to one thing, and he's probably, his mouth is probably tied shut with the position he's in, and he has to be very careful at what he commits to. All this is going to be done in a court of law. This is not going to be done with a media interviewing somebody. He'll be held accountable if he can't buy the right people off. This transportation expert we have, I just learned who he was yesterday, and I watched some of the concerns he had, which was none. He has no concerns for this. I'm not sure what he's thinking or what he thinks it should take to make the railroad safe, but they're not doing it. They're not. I mean, several days after this derailment, another derailment happens with the same company.
Multiple.
What's
actually.
going on? I mean, why aren't you doing something about that? You're in a position where you can make people safe, but you just want that paycheck?
And it's a problem. I mean, when you look at the donations from the railroad industry, the amount of money they're spending on lobbying to both parties on this, it's the numbers are big. The numbers, it's out there. You can go and look at it. The other thing, I mean, this falls under two administrations of this, and it goes back even further than that. Initially, under President Trump, there were some regulations that were rolled back. Would they have necessarily prevented this? Maybe not, but, you know, we're deregulating more an industry that already doesn't have many regulations. And then the Biden administration does not bring back any of these regulations. And in fact, the Biden administration also squashed the workers, the railroad workers who have been raising concerns, safety concerns about them being overworked, about out-of-date equipment. I mean, they're using braking systems that were developed during the Civil War. Because
they're still working.
Right, and which is crazy to me.
Oh, they're not working, but as far as they're concerned, they're getting a car from point A to point B.
Right.
90% of the time.
So it's thing after thing, and it's, again, both parties clearly at fault here. There needs to be some sort of new regulations put into place, because these railroads are not going to do it themselves. They're going to do whatever they can do to make more money.
Let's look at it this way.
Yeah.
There was a man on television that took a 357 out of an envelope and he shot himself on television. And right away, all the experts wanted to make a whole bunch more gun laws to keep this from happening. So the NRA got on the books and they realized that there was 42 gun laws already, none of them being implemented correctly. So the government can make any kind of law that they want to make, and they can try to enforce it the best they can, but it boils down to that railroad company having integrity and convictions to keep public safe. It falls completely on them, because rules are broke everywhere we go. You go down that road 70 miles an hour or 110 miles an hour on a rice rocket, and who's going to enforce that? You got to have enough decency inside to do the right thing. And now that he's not done the right thing, that CEO needs to make all of this right with their monies. Their monies that they saved by not doing it right in the first place. They need to do it right.
No, I agree. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm as optimistic as you that a company like Norfolk Southern is going to make that integrity move. I wish that they would. But, you know, I think it'll probably need to be some sort of combination of, there need to be some new rules in place, and there needs to be steep fines for breaking the rules. Some easy ones could be, you know, they're running trains that are almost 2 miles long through town. They used to be running them half that distance, essentially. So from folks we're talking to, so that around turns and things like that, the conductors can actually look back and see. Maybe having more than 2 people on a train that long. Small things is what I'm saying that I think could probably be implemented, that really don't cost the railroad a whole lot of money, would be a little easier to enforce. I'm not talking anything even crazy here, but we'll see. I don't necessarily see the railroads coming in and essentially on their own doing something to prevent this from happening.
when the fine is so much less than the cost,
And that's the issue.
it's easy to pay the fine.
Yeah.
When you have a gambling casino and you're supposed to give 18% back to the public,
Yep.
and you cut that short, and when you cut it short, you make more money over the fine that you have to pay for cutting it short.
Yep.
That's what's wrong with our system.
Agreed.
That's exactly what's wrong with our system, is that we don't have it set up enough to where you're afraid to break the rules.
Yep.
They're not afraid to break the rules.
Then they're not afraid to break the rules, to your point, because the fines aren't there and they're not correct. And number two, again, the politicians are all right in their pocket.
That's the biggest thing right there.
Yep. To bring this to a little bit, change the direction of this a little bit. Unfortunately, we're seeing lots of folks in and around town experiencing all sorts of different health implications as a result of all this going on. Have either of you experienced anything since this all has kind of begun?
I haven't really noticed anything. I've kind of woke up with a couple bloody noses. I mean, that's kind of normal for me, like when the weather starts to get nice, and we've had some really unusually warm weather for Ohio. So I don't want to say that it's not from the train, but I can't say that it is. I will say Monday when they did the controlled burn, I did wake up about 2 o'clock, and I could taste it. It was like almost hard to describe it, like a sweet metallic taste almost.
Mm-hmm. And you, to be clear, like they did not tell you that you needed to evacuate for that?
No, we are roughly 3 miles outside of the ground zero.
And you were inside of your home and you
Yes.
could taste it
Yes.
in the middle
Like
of
I woke up around 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
The reason she could taste it
the
mostly,
crick.
this
could-
crick was just putting off a horrendous odor.
And probably,
It was blue for a while. It was
Yeah.
blue up to a week. A real
and
blue
then
cast to it.
Probably for about a week after, you could really smell it. More so at night, I think, when the winds shifted and it was blowing more towards the house. But yeah, we could really, really smell anytime you got close to the creek or went over the bridge.
And I would say too, like when we're down in town, the part of the creek that runs right through East Palestine, and they've got the sprayers there getting it up there. You can smell it down there still pretty clearly. Same goes for at night when we interviewed Jenny and Jenna and some of their neighbors. When they got the train tracks right in their backyard, and when the trains are ripping by, you're getting the smell of something kicking up or whatever it may be. But you can smell it, you can feel it in your eyes even a little bit. What about you, sir?
I had a headache for 4 days, but I'm not going to contribute it to anything other than aggravation. When they're disposing of this powder, this burnt ash, I don't know whether you have any of that on film, but the excavator is dumping it into the open truck, and the powder is just going everywhere. And guess who's there overseeing this? Our EPA. We can't, I worked at a nuclear power plant for 27 years. We can't send something down the road that's going to endanger any public. We put it in what's called a hick, and then a concrete cask to, if it has, let's say 1,000 rem inside on the activity of the radiation, when you walk beside it, you're only allowed to go to so many millirem, which it's an amount that wouldn't hurt you in a heartbeat. That's how strictly the nuclear regulatory system governs us. Man, I'd like to see that implemented on the trains.
I mean, the fact that even just the debris, the fact that it's just they're piling it into this
in the air. The debris is just flying in the air when they're loading it, and they're taking it down the road without a tarp on it.
And it makes me laugh too. I watched one of the podcasts from the other day. Vinyl chloride is the most regulated by OSHA, but yet it caught on fire and we're allowed to be in town.
Right. Yep. And unfortunately too, to get back a little bit towards the beginning of this with the testing, they're testing for vinyl chloride and whatnot. But again, the vinyl chloride, once it gets above 8 degrees Fahrenheit, boils off and turns into several other things, including dioxin, which I mentioned at the start of this. Many of these tests are not including anything for dioxin at all. I mean, again, to get back to the transparency of all of this sort of stuff, there is none. Be clear with folks exactly what they're doing. It's a shame that the town is essentially being taken advantage of. They think that y'all aren't going to pay attention to it. It's a shame. I guess if there's anything else that you'd want to share to get out there to folks that maybe you don't think is getting out there about what's going on here in East Palestine, is there anything they can think of?
No, I think one of my biggest concerns, obviously we touched a little bit on it earlier, is the well. You know, a lot of people, especially south of Palestine, here towards, you know, the bottom end of town and Negley, have well water. You know, and our well was tested. It was a week ago, this past Wednesday. We haven't got our results back, but, you know, groundwater, it travels down approximately 10 feet a year. So, like, right now I'm not that concerned about it, but what happens in 5 years? Our well is approximately 50 feet deep.
Right.
You know, who takes care of us in 5 years when, God forbid, something happens?
And has there been any, like, are there resources available to you right now to have your well tested, provided by the state or anybody?
The health department does well testing,
Okay.
And they came with, was it AMCO, whatever company that Norfolk Southern sent out, and they took their own samples, and AMCO took their own samples.
Okay.
I have been in touch with another company that does private testing. He could only test for 3 of the initial chemicals that they had said were released. He was trying to find a lab that does further testing for those other additional chemicals that they've since said were on the train. But he has not found a lab to do that yet. So
again, the fact that Norfolk Southern, like the people that Norfolk Southern is sending, and you know, the companies that they're hiring, they're like, oh, we can't test for all of the chemicals on board, but we'll test your well. What's the point in testing it if you can't test for everything that's on board? That's insane. Is there anything else you want to share, Wayne?
Yeah, slow up on the support until it's needed. I mean, there's a lot of support right now, and I was asked last night to take water that I really didn't need because they needed to get it distributed. When Trump brought in that tractor trailer load of water, that was too much all at once because there was already a lot of people taking care of the water situation. But just don't forget the members of East Palestine 2, 3, 4 months down the road when that need is there. Right now you can just store it somewhere and then bring it out a little bit at a time.
Yep.
Or even the surrounding areas, you know, Negley, we've mentioned, nobody's really mentioned Darlington, which is just across the border in PA.
Yep.
You know, the plume traveled in that direction initially before the winds switched. So they haven't really gotten a lot of recognition except the people immediately in that 1 mile evacuation zone.
Absolutely. Well, I can assure you, we talked a little bit before this. This is our first trip here. It's definitely not going to be our last trip here. So I'd love to stay in touch with both of you as all this happens. And thank you guys so much for taking the time.